Okay, so this next lecture will be on water chemistry. And so water, of course, is very important to all of life. And for our bodies, water is going to make up about 60% of our body weight on average. It's going to be a little bit more in children, for example. Um, Water is important because it's going to be a solvent and it's going to be involved in moving things through your blood, of course. So you're going to have water-loving compounds and water-hating compounds that you have to transverse through our blood, which all are going to be important for some sort of body function. And then water is going to be able to also dissipate heat. So an example of the amount of water in your body is shown here. You have total body water in your intracellular fluid, and then you have some in your extracellular fluid. So you see that intracellular, inside your cells, you are going to have more water than in your extracellular fluids. And your extracellular fluids are going to be interstitial, bathing your organs, and also, of course, in your blood. So now water is going to be bipolar. And so basically all that means is that you have unequal sharing of your bonds. And you have hydrogen bonds, which are going to be very weak. And hydrogen bonds are, in essence, they're called bonds, but it's more of an interaction. And so the hydrogen and oxygen interact with each other and have some attraction to each other and form these hydrogen bonds. And you can see on the water molecule here, your hydrogen are going to be a partial, that delta is partial, a partial positive charge, and then your oxygen is going to have that delta or partial negative charge. So in general, what is going to dissolve in water? Well, you're going to have some things that are going to have to be more attractive to water than to themselves. So some of the rules are that particles of solutes are separated. So you have the solute particles separate, and the solvent particles separate. And then the solute and the solvent particles attract each other. Okay, so oftentimes what's going on in water is that you'll have compounds that will be moved through water that have a higher attraction to oxygen and hydrogen than oxygen and hydrogen have to each other. And so that will allow the solvent, the water, to dissipate and bind to the solute in order to move them. So basically, a solute would dissolve if the attraction between the solvent and the solute is stronger and enough to compete with the solute-solute and the solvent-solvent forces of attraction. So again, something that dissolves in water has to attract water more than water attracts itself, if you want to think of it that way. Now, polar covalent compounds that are going to be able to form hydrogen bonds with water are going to dissolve. Molecules that ionize are going to dissolve. So those are going to be molecules that are going to split apart into their pieces, and each piece will be attracted to the water molecules. And so we have ionic compounds. Now, what doesn't dissolve in water are nonpolar molecules. So nonpolar molecules such as our fat-soluble vitamin A, which is shown here. This is fat-soluble vitamin A. Vitamin C is water-soluble, and so you can see vitamin C has many hydroxide groups. Vitamin A has very few, and therefore vitamin C can attract water more than vitamin A. So water will be likely to stay together in the presence of vitamin A and not interact with vitamin A, whereas in vitamin C, the water will interact with all the different hydroxyl groups on the vitamin C molecule. So we have sodium chloride in water, which is going to be a polar covalent compound that ionizes in water. So these sodium chloride is highly polarized, and the bonds are going to break. And so you're basically going to have your different sodium and chloride, and your sodium ions that are positive will interact with the oxygen of water, and then your chlorides, which are more negative, will interact with the hydrogen of the water. And so ionic solids are going to have positive and negative ions in basically this 3D lattice. And then this is going to all be held together by strong electrostatic forces. And then water is going to be able to interact with these ionic compounds because of its polar charges. So its hydrogen being more positive and its oxygen being more negative. Now, water is considered a solvent of life, and it has electrolytes. And electrolytes are basically a salt that dissociates in a solution into ions. So again, it goes back to the ions. If you have charged particles, those charges will attract the water molecules. So electrolytes are salts that dissociate into charged particles. And then, so of course, you're going to have your cations, which will be positive, and anions, which will be negative, charged. And the function for electrolytes is in fluid balance. And they are also important in the transmission of nerve impulses. And they're important for muscle activity. Now in the extracellular fluid, which is basically your plasma and interstitial fluid combined, you're going to be, primarily your cation is going to be sodium, and your anion is going to be chloride. And in the intracellular fluid, your cation is going to be potassium, and your anion are going to be made up of phosphates. Now, water is going to have thermal regulatory properties, of course, and basically one of the reasons is because it has a high heat of fusion. And it has high thermal conductivity. And so water is able to take heat without getting heated up itself for pretty long ranges of temperatures. So water is going to help to maintain the body's temperature. So when we talk about water with respect to thermal regulation, we're really talking about specific heat. So specific heat is the amount of heat required to change the temperature of 1 gram of water 1 degree Celsius. And so having this high specific heat, high heat of fusion, means that changing the temperature of water is not very easy. It has a high heat of vaporization, and you can get rid of a lot of the heat from your body through sweat evaporation on your skin. And so sweat evaporation is actually a cooling method. Um, and then so because you have this high heat of fusion, high thermal conductivity, and the ability to expel heat through sweat, water is a major regulation of your internal body temperature. Now, your hypothalamus is going to play an important role in homeostasis, and your hypothalamus is a hormone control system. Of course, with respect to heat, your body temperature is going to be at 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, which is also 37 degrees Celsius. This is body temp. And so your hypothalamus is going to read your body temperature through various inputs, and then it's going to react with various outputs. So circadian rhythms are going to input into your hypothalamus. You're going to have visceral sensory information with respect to things like blood pressure. And then you're going to have your brainstem nucleus is going to pay attention to your skin temperature, whether you're hot, whether you're cold, that kind of thing. And then the hypothalamus, of course, is going to send signals back to systems that help to control all of these. So your hypothalamus is going to have an impact on heart rate, digestion, sweating. It sends its hormones through the blood, so it's an endocrine release of hormones. So this is going to be able to maintain your body temperature, for example, which is what we're talking about. It also has other effects as well, such as blood pressure, metabolism, etc. So there is also hypothermia, and hypothermia is a condition in which you have low body temperature, and it can get dangerously low. So keep in mind that 37 degrees Celsius, this is on a Celsius scale, this one here, so 37 degrees Celsius is normal. And then when you get low in the Celsius range down to about 22 degrees, this is where you unfortunately will succumb to the hypothermia. Now, just a little bit more about what's going on with water and our bodies. Water has a very important role with respect to osmolality. So osmolarity measures solutes weight, and it's always done in volume. So in this case, it's a liter of solution. And so 1 mole basically of a substance is going to be its gram molecular weight. And so 1 mole of sodium chloride is going to be 58, which is 23 plus 35. And then with respect to concentrations, you have 1 molar concentration is 1 mole per liter. And so this is the same as saying 1 mole per kilogram. So volume and weight can be interchangeable because you assume 1 gram equals 1 mil. Okay, so with respect to water in your blood versus in your tissues, there are some terms that we use with respect to red blood cells. Red blood cells, again, are an indicator of things happening in the body. And so when your red blood cells are in a hypertonic solution, and what a hypertonic solution means is that you have too much water inside the cell and too little outside the cell. So your water is going to move from inside the cell outside, so you're going to become, it's a hypertonic. Isotonic is where you have equal exchange of water inside and outside, so this is a normal condition. And then, of course, hypotonic means that the electrolytes are pushing water into the cells. So the movement of the water is going into the cells, and your cells are going to swell and potentially burst. Osmolarity is going to be influenced by many things. So as you can imagine, it's going to be highly influenced by the charges inside and outside of the cells. So sodium chloride is going to have a bigger influence than non-ionizable ion-making compounds. So for example, urea and glucose, those don't really break down. Sodium chloride breaks down into charges, and so that's going to influence the movement of water more than your glucose and urea, for example. Your electrolytes are what are going to break into charges, so those are going to have a big influence. Non-electrolytes are going to be things like your blood urea nitrogen levels, BUN levels, glucose, ketones, alcohols, etc. Sodium is very important, so sodium chloride dissociates, and sodium is extracellular, so that's going to contribute to about 50% of plasma osmolality. Now just a little bit about what BUN is. BUN is blood urea nitrogen, and then so a normal is about 70 to 20 milligrams per deciliter in the blood. And so what's going on? Why do you have blood urea? So basically, urea is going to be generated by your kidney cells, and this is going to occur when proteins are being catabolized. And then your liver makes urea, which this releases nitrogen, and then the nitrogen goes to the liver, and liver will generate urea. Now the kidney is what's going to actually remove these urea nitrogens, and so your blood urea nitrogen can increase if the kidney cannot remove them. So the liver makes them, and then the kidney excretes. The urea nitrogen. And so if you have kidney failure, if you have dehydration, and your kidney cannot remove the nitrogen, then those levels will increase in the blood. The liver also, if it's damaged, can have an influence on disease levels, because your urea nitrogen levels will actually decrease. So we have damage to kidneys, and this will result in an increase of blood. We have damage to your liver, and this results in a decrease in blood nitrogen, urea nitrogen. All right, so water, of course, is able to move around, and there are a lot of different channels and mechanisms for different substances to get into and out of cells. So charged particles have to move through ion channels, and so these are gated channels usually. And water is more free. There are receptors for water on cells, and so water can get picked up, but these receptors are typically opened. So water will move in response to the electrolyte and the charges rather than the actual opening and closing of a channel, such as with ions. So osmotic pressure is really the concentration of proteins and ions on one side of a membrane or the other side of the membrane, which influences the flow of water across the membrane. So it's the concentration of proteins plus ions concentration in and out of the cell that influences water flow. Sodium and chloride, of course, account for about 90% of the osmotic activity in the plasma. So NaCl, approximately 90%. And plasma is the liquid portion of blood. Of course, the other part are going to be cellular. And so sodium chloride is a major osmoregulator. And then ions are going to be excreted in the urine. So it's the kidney will release ions into your urine. So serum osmolality is going to, when you measure serum osmolality, you're measuring the dissolved particles per unit of water. And so when you have a low serum osmolality, this means you have a decreased concentration. And when you have a high serum osmolality, you have an increased concentration of particles. And so what can cause low serum osmolality is an increase in excretion over hydration. So you're releasing more and more out than you're taking up, less in. And then high serum osmolality is going to be caused mostly by dehydration. Okay, so that's the end of this lecture.